Come, Holy Spirit, come. Take our minds and think through them. Take our lips and speak through them. Take our hands and work through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire with the flame of your love. Amen. Amen. I just want to say, singing Precious Lord, Take My Hand this morning, I could tell where the Baptists, the former Baptists were sitting, and where the lifelong Episcopalians were singing. The Baptists were looking up from memory, singing Precious Lord, Take My Hand. The Episcopalians were going. Let it be, if you didn't notice, I was looking out. I did not need the words. In February 1994, we moved into an old house painted red on Newberry Neck. We arrived with 3-year-old son Thomas in tow in the middle of a snowstorm, or maybe it was just after one, I don't remember. In the kitchen, heated by a wood-burning stove, stood a table with a blueberry pie from Marilyn Hinckley and purple hyacinths in full bloom. They were gifts from the people of St. Francis welcoming us to Maine. We later found out that the blueberry pie was from George Semler, who would become our nearest neighbor when we moved to Fly Point Road in Brooklyn. The flowers were from Ellen Anthony, then senior warden, sometime organist, wife of the founding priest of this parish, Ken Anthony. The smell of those hyacinths, as you probably can imagine, filled the whole house that cold winter afternoon. And to this day, I never smell hyacinths without thinking of Ellen and the love that surrounded us that day and every day thereafter from the people of this parish. Can you smell it? I have an idea that the sense of smell can open up worlds of memory, release long-forgotten stories, and draw us more deeply into the mystery. Rudyard Kipling said it like this: smells are surer than sights or sounds to make your heartstrings crack. As we heard in this morning's gospel, Mary and Martha sent word for Jesus to come to Bethany and heal the brother Lazarus of a mortal illness, but Jesus didn't come. He said it was because God had something else in store for Lazarus. When he finally walked through the door, the house smelled bitter and full of resentment. "Where have you been, Jesus? If you'd come when we called, our brother, your dear friend, would still be alive. Now he's 4 days dead, and the stench of his death won't leave this house." Jesus asked them to lead him to the tomb. There he prayed that God would raise Lazarus. And out of the darkness, out of the putrid, death-filled cavern stumbled Lazarus, still wrapped in strips of cloth, still smelling like holy death. Jesus said, "Unbind him and let him go." Of course, for the religious authorities, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. If we don't put an end to him now, they said, people are going to start believing in him, and the Romans will come and destroy everything. And they began to hatch a plan to have him killed, and we know where that goes. Perhaps Jesus smelled fear in the air. Certainly he must have sensed the change that was coming. It only took a whiff for him to know he needed to lie low, that his enemies were searching for him, so Jesus left town for a while. But before too long, he came back to Bethany, to the home of his friends. The story continues. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of perfume. Don't you suppose Mary and Martha and Lazarus enjoyed the fragrance that filled the house that day Jesus dropped by for supper? When he walked into the house, he smelled dinner cooking. The menu might have included a typical Middle Eastern feast, roast lamb and rosemary, mixed with freshly baked pita and cucumbers soaking in vinegar and mint. He plopped down in a chair by the fire, put his dirty, tired feet up on a stool, and sighed deeply. Now, it was common in those days that guests' feet were washed before dinner, most often by one of the household servants. Martha and Lazarus, not to mention the other dinner guests, must have been shocked, maybe even scandalized, when Mary got down on her knees, lifted Jesus' feet into a basin, and poured a whole bottle of perfume over them. No one in the room expected to see that. And then Mary began to massage the oil into his feet, and don't you think Jesus was smiling? It was shocking enough that Mary, Jesus' host, was kneeling at his feet. But her gender made it all the more remarkable because women never touched men at all in public. And she didn't simply wash his feet with water. She had this bottle of nard she'd been saving. The gospel tells us that the perfume was made of pure nard, but if you're thinking it smelled like Chanel No. 5, forget it. I've heard the scent of nard described as earthy, intense, and musky, reminiscent of rich soil. In a few weeks now, Gretchen will be digging around in our garden, getting the ground ready for this year's planting. Will this year be the year we harvest the asparagus from those plants she put into the ground 3 years ago? Will the deer once again mow down the hostas just as they're reaching full growth? Can you smell the spring soil even now? Imagine that, and you have an idea of what nard smells like. Legend has it that the ancient poet Horace offered to send his friend Virgil a whole barrel of his best wine in exchange for one tiny bottle of nard. Mary had a pound of the stuff. Can you smell it yet? Mary opened that costly bottle and poured it all out, every drop of it, wasting it on the dirt-encrusted feet of Jesus. And leaning over those feet, now bathed in priceless oil, Mary wiped them with her hair. And the fragrance of her love, her devotion to Jesus, fills the whole room. I had a friend in seminary whose name was Martha. She married a Delta airline pilot named Bill, and they had 5 children, some grandchildren, and an indeterminate number of cats and dogs. She had several godchildren, but one kind of stands out for us, Lizzie, our now 27-year-old daughter. Martha was a beautiful person and deceptively funny, deeply compassionate, a great preacher, and a wonderful counselor. There wasn't a phony bone in her body. When she was younger, she struggled with anorexia, and when she began to recover from that illness, she freely shared her struggle with others, especially with women who might be dealing with the same affliction. In the last few years of her life, she worked at a women's prison in Atlanta, serving as pastor and priest. I have no doubt she touched many, many lives, and that no one remained unchanged from having brushed up against her. It's been about 15 years ago now that she found out she had cancer. For the next year and a half, she fought as valiantly as I've ever seen anyone fight, determined to live, never giving up, even at the end. One of Martha's other close priest friends visited her bedside at home the day she died, And at the family's request, he anointed her with the only oil available to him, a jar of olive oil in Martha's kitchen cabinet. With that oil, he made the sign of the cross on her forehead one last time, said the prayers with her children, her mother, and her husband encircling the bed. A few hours later, she died. Now, you need to know that the priest who anointed Martha is not an overtly sentimental kind of guy. In fact, he has a reputation of being pretty down to earth. He doesn't tend to spiritualize things. But I remember a conversation the two of us had a few months after Martha died. He told me that the memory of her lingers with him in a way no one ever has. He's well into his 80s now and has lost his share of family and friends over the years, some very close. But he describes the very real sense of Martha's abiding presence in his life. He didn't try to put words to it beyond that, but I think the feeling in listening to him that it's as if the scent of Martha stuck to him and isn't letting go. One more thing about her, Martha had a way of bringing people together, of building bridges between people who didn't see eye to eye, who sometimes didn't even like each other very much. I watched her do that with our colleagues on the staff of a large church in downtown Atlanta when we were young, newly minted priests. And I've been told that two members of her immediate family never had much time for each other. Oh, they'd be polite to each other the way Southern women and men in the same family can be polite to each other. You know what I'm talking about, Judy. But for 40 years or so, while Martha was alive, they tiptoed around each other. Since she died, they talked on the phone most regularly and even had lunch together from time to time. It's as if the scent of Martha, her fragrance, sticks to them even now, giving them the grace to be with each other in a new way. That day in Bethany, the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. And when Mary got up from wiping Jesus' feet with her hair, the fragrance of it stuck to her. What does God's love smell like? Well, that day, I guess it smelled a little like earthy, musky nard, poured out so freely, even prodigally. We don't hear the names of everyone at the dinner table that night. I suspect that some of the disciples must have been there as traveling companions of Jesus, headed toward Jerusalem one last time. If they were paying attention, Mary was teaching them how to love Jesus. Mary was teaching them how to be disciples. And it seems to me that at least a few of them caught some of Mary's unexpected over-the-top discipleship. I'm guessing some of that rich, earthy fragrance stuck to them. In the coming days, those same disciples would fall asleep while Jesus was praying in the garden. Peter would flagrantly deny even knowing him. But the sense of love stayed with them. Jesus' scent. The scent of promise, of hope, of resurrection, of new life stuck on them. And in the days and weeks and years after Jesus was no longer with them on earth, people were still catching his scent from each other. I wonder, do the people who brush up against you and me today, do they ever catch a whiff of God on us?